In the mystical depths of Enal's northern continent, where ancient magic flows like rivers through crystal veins and reality bends to the will of those who understand its secrets, three souls find their destinies intertwined in ways that will reshape their world forever. This is their story of love conquering darkness, of bonds that transcend species and tradition, and of choices that birth legends whispered across realms. The Blue Blade clan has protected the northern territories for millennia, their crystal spires rising from mountain faces like fingers of pure starlight reaching toward the heavens. Their Omega Seers, gifted with prophetic sight beyond mortal measure, have maintained the delicate balance between elemental forces that keeps their world stable and beautiful. Among them stands Lyareth, young yet possessed of power that makes even elder mages whisper in awe and wonder. Lyareth's crystal blue eyes can peer through time's veil with startling clarity, seeing futures both bright and terrible with an accuracy that borders on the divine. His silver hair catches moonlight even in darkness, and when he speaks prophecy, the very air around him shimmers with otherworldly energy. Unlike other Omega elves expected to serve as gentle mediators, Lyareth possesses a core of steel wrapped in silk, his wisdom and determination earning respect from warriors and scholars alike. When corruption begins devouring the magical networks like a cancer of pure malevolence, turning healing springs to poison and crumbling ancient strongholds to dust and memory, Lyareth's visions reveal a truth that chills his very soul to its foundation. The creeping darkness follows no natural pattern but spreads with intelligent purpose, seeking the most vital magical nodes and systematically destroying them with calculated precision. Unless decisive action is taken, this malevolent plague will consume everything he holds dear, leaving only wasteland where beauty once flourished. The corruption defies every traditional method of purification the clan's master healers attempt. Ancient rituals that have cleansed magical disturbances for centuries prove useless against this new threat. Protective wards crumble at its touch, and even the most powerful cleansing magics only slow its advance temporarily. Lyareth's visions show him the true scope of the catastrophe. If left unchecked, the corruption will spread beyond the Blue Blade territories, consuming everything in its path until the entire continent becomes a wasteland of twisted magic and broken dreams. Desperate to save his people and the world itself, Lyareth commits an act that horrifies his clan elders and family alike. In the deepest chambers of their mountain stronghold, surrounded by wards that have contained dangerous energies for centuries, he performs a forbidden summoning ritual. His target? Reshazir, an ancient demon of flame and shadow whose very name inspires terror among scholars of the arcane arts. The preparation alone takes weeks of careful study and gathering of rare components. Lyareth pores over forbidden texts written in languages that predate recorded history, their pages bound in materials that burn the unwary and protected by curses that have claimed the lives of lesser scholars. The ritual circle he creates is a masterwork of precision, inlaid with precious metals and gems that focus magical energy with surgical accuracy. The manifestation is spectacular and terrifying beyond description. Fire erupts from solid stone, the air itself ignites in cascades of flame, and through the inferno steps a being of impossible beauty and danger. Reshazir towers above mortal height, his form wreathed in flames that dance like living silk across skin that gleams like polished obsidian. His eyes burn with the intensity of newborn stars, and his voice carries the music of forge fires and distant thunder. When he speaks, reality itself seems to listen and obey. The demon's presence fills the chamber with heat that should kill any mortal, yet Lyareth stands unwavering, protected by his own considerable magical defenses and driven by desperation that overrides fear. Reshazir studies the young elf with eyes that have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, intrigued by this mortal who dares summon him with such audacious purpose. The contract they forge is written in the language of true names, making it unbreakable by either party. Each word carries weight that settles into their very souls, creating bonds that transcend physical existence. Reshazir will cleanse the corruption threatening the magical networks and reveal its ultimate source, but Lyareth must pay with his freedom, becoming bound to seek the legendary source of ether and deliver to the demon the key to infinite magical power. The source of ether, as described in the most ancient texts, is the living heart of all magic, the place where elemental forces are born and from which they flow to give life to every realm. Control of the source would grant its wielder power beyond imagination, the ability to reshape reality itself according to their will. It is a prize that has been sought by countless beings throughout history, yet none have successfully located it, let alone gained access to its transformative power. But Lyreth will not journey alone into the unknown dangers ahead. The clan elders, horrified by their young seer's desperate gamble with forces beyond mortal comprehension, assign him a protector whose loyalty to the Blue Blade clan runs deeper than blood itself. Ivrion, a werewolf whose story intertwines with elven history, will serve as guardian and companion on this perilous quest. Ivrion carries the legacy of his father, a werewolf commander who had forged an unprecedented alliance between his pack and the elves, fighting alongside them in countless battles and earning a reputation for loyalty and honor that became legendary among both species. When the elder werewolf died defending an elven settlement from raiders, his young son was taken in by the Blue Blade clan and raised alongside their own children, learning elven ways while retaining his wild heritage. Younger than Lyreth, yet no less formidable, Ivrion moves with the predatory grace of his wolf nature tempered by elven wisdom and magical training. His amber eyes hold depths that speak of moonlit forests and ancient hunts, while his gentle hands can channel healing magic or summon claws sharp enough to rend steel when necessity demands. The elf finds himself both protected and intrigued by this enigmatic guardian whose dual nature bridges two very different worlds. Ivrion's werewolf senses allow him to track scents across vast distances, move with supernatural silence even across treacherous terrain, and detect dangers that would escape normal perception entirely. His physical strength surpasses that of most humanoid races, yet he tempers this power with elven-taught restraint and magical knowledge that makes him a formidable ally in any situation. The combination of wild instinct and learned wisdom creates a complexity that fascinates Lyreth despite their formal guardian-ward relationship. What neither the clan elders nor Lyreth himself knows is that Ivrion carries a terrible secret that threatens to tear him apart from within. His former pack, the remnants of the group his father once commanded with such distinction, holds his beloved younger sister as a hostage. They demand he spy on Lyreth, gathering information about the demon contract and any discoveries regarding the source of Ether's location, reporting back through magical means at regular intervals. The pack leaders have their own ambitious plans for the power that the source of Ether represents. They believe control of such a force would allow them to establish werewolf dominance over all other races, creating a new world order with themselves as absolute rulers. To ensure Ivrion's compliance with their demands, they keep his sister under constant guard, making it clear that her safety depends entirely on his willingness to betray the trust placed in him by the Blue Blade clan. Torn between love for his sibling and growing feelings for the elf he's meant to protect, Ivrion walks a knife's edge of conflicted loyalty. Every moment spent in Lyreth's company deepens his internal struggle, as genuine affection for the brave young seer wars with desperate fear for his sister's well-being. The werewolf finds himself hoping against hope that he can fulfill both obligations without having to choose between them. Their quest leads them through lands where magic runs wild and untamed, where the natural laws that govern ordinary reality bend and shift according to ancient powers that predate civilization itself. Together they cross mystical barriers between realms, each step drawing them closer to their destination and, unknowingly, to each other in ways that transcend their formal roles. They traverse forests where trees whisper secrets in languages older than recorded history, their branches reaching across dimensional boundaries to share knowledge with beings in distant realms. Rivers flow uphill in defiance of gravity, their waters carrying memories of ages past and glimpses of possible futures. Lakes reflect not the sky above but visions of other worlds, their surfaces serving as windows into realities where different choices have led to vastly different outcomes. The journey is arduous and fraught with dangers that test both their magical abilities and their growing partnership. They encounter creatures that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, beings whose very presence causes reality to fluctuate around them. Ancient ruins of the landscape, remnants of civilizations that mastered forms of magic now lost to the world, their crumbling walls still humming with residual power that makes the air itself vibrate with potential. As they travel together through these wonders and perils, Lyreth and Ivrion find their formal relationship gradually evolving into something deeper and more personal. The elf discovers that beneath Ivrion's serious demeanor lies a playful intelligence and capacity for compassion shaped by his unique upbringing among two very different cultures. Ivrion, in turn, finds himself amazed by Lyreth's inner strength and determination, realizing that his initial assumptions about Omega elves as fragile and dependent are completely incorrect. They begin sharing stories around their evening campfires, tales of childhood among the crystal spires, memories of learning to balance wild werewolf instincts with elven wisdom, dreams for the future that extend beyond the completion of their current quest. Lyreth speaks of visions that drive him to seek solutions where others see only problems, while Ivrion shares lessons learned from a father who taught him that true strength comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The growing bond between them is complicated by the increasing frequency of Reshazir's manifestations. The demon appears to Lyreth in dreams and reflections with growing regularity, sometimes offering cryptic guidance about their route, sometimes simply reminding the elf of his obligations under their unbreakable contract. These encounters are deeply unsettling yet strangely compelling, as Lyreth finds himself drawn to the being's vast intelligence and unexpected complexity. Reshazir proves to be unlike any demon described in traditional texts or scholarly treatises. Rather than being purely malevolent, he demonstrates motivations that include genuine curiosity about the mortal world and a form of respect for those who show courage when facing overwhelming odds. His conversations with Lyreth often turn philosophical, exploring questions about the nature of power, the meaning of sacrifice, and the eternal tension between individual choice and collective responsibility. The labyrinth of springs appears before them like a vision from fevered dreams, hidden beneath a waterfall that flows backward in defiance of natural law, its waters rising from a pool at the cliff's base and streaming upward into skybound clouds that exist independently of normal weather patterns. This ancient sanctuary once served masters of water magic, its crystal passages glowing with inner light that pulses in rhythm with hidden magical currents, its chambers filled with pools that serve as windows into distant realms and forgotten times. The labyrinth itself is a marvel of engineering that transcends purely physical construction, with passages carved from living crystal that responds to the emotional states of those who walk within its halls. Walls are covered with inscriptions in languages that predate any known civilization, telling stories of the beings who built this place and the sacred purposes for which it was designed. Water flows through the structure in patterns that defy gravity and logic, creating a three-dimensional web of liquid light that serves both aesthetic and magical functions. Here they encounter Sturien, the labyrinth's solitary guardian for countless centuries of patient vigil. Neither fully demon nor nature spirit, he defies easy classification, standing tall and elegant with iridescent skin that shifts from pale blue to silver depending on the angle of light and his emotional state. Graceful horns curve from his temples like living crystal, and his eyes glow with soft luminescence that seems to contain moonlight reflected in still water. When he speaks, his voice carries harmonic undertones that make the very air vibrate with power, and the floating water streams respond to his emotions with fluid choreography. Sturien's initial reaction to visitors in his domain is one of suspicion and barely contained hostility. He has guarded this sacred place for longer than most civilizations have existed, protecting the ancient springs from those who would seek to exploit their power for personal gain. Too many seekers have arrived with noble intentions only to be corrupted by the immense magical forces they encountered, forcing him to become both protector and executioner when circumstances demanded such harsh measures. The Guardian is particularly wary of Ivrion, whose werewolf scent immediately marks him as a member of a species that Sturien has learned to distrust through bitter experience. Werewolf packs have repeatedly sent representatives to the labyrinth seeking power they claimed was needed to protect their territories, only to reveal later that their true goal was conquest and domination over other races. The Guardian's long experience has taught him that werewolves, despite their claims of honor and loyalty, are often driven by ambitions that make them dangerous allies at best. But as Sturien listens to Lyreth's explanation of their quest and observes the subtle interactions between the elf and his werewolf companion, he begins to sense that these visitors might be different from the usual power seekers who find their way to his domain. There is something in the way they look at each other, a connection that goes beyond mere partnership or duty, that suggests they might be capable of the kind of selfless cooperation that the labyrinth's original builders had intended to foster. The Guardian reveals to them the true and tragic history of the springs he has devoted his existence to protecting. Long ago, the labyrinth was maintained by a triumvirate of guardians representing 3 different magical traditions, working together to maintain the delicate balance of forces that kept the springs flowing with pure, healing water. Each guardian brought unique abilities and perspectives, their cooperation creating a harmony that allowed the magical waters to serve as a source of renewal for the entire continent's magical ecosystem. But this perfect balance was shattered when one of the guardians fell deeply in love with a mortal seeker who had come to the springs seeking power to save her dying homeland. In his desperate desire to grant his beloved the strength she needed, the guardian disrupted the carefully maintained equilibrium that kept the magic stable and pure. The resulting magical backlash was catastrophic, corrupting the healing waters and transforming them into pools of chaotic energy that poisoned everything they touched. The unfaithful guardian was consumed by the magical forces he had tried to manipulate, his soul trapped in the deepest levels of the labyrinth where it continues to suffer, serving as an eternal warning to future generations about the dangers of placing personal desire above sacred duty and collective responsibility. The other 2 guardians were lost in the catastrophe as well, leaving Sturien to maintain the springs alone, using his own life force to slowly purify the corruption through centuries of patient, solitary work. This revelation transforms everything about their quest and its ultimate implications. The source of ether is not some distant legendary artifact waiting to be discovered, but the very heart of the spring system itself, the central nexus from which all the magical waters flow to nourish the continent's magical networks. Giving Reshazir access to the source would mean granting the demon control over the entire magical ecosystem, a prospect that fills all 3 of them with profound dread and foreboding. But the corruption threatening the Blue Blade clan is directly connected to the spring's weakened state. Without the proper balance of guardians to maintain the magical flows, instabilities have been building for centuries, eventually reaching the point where they manifest as the creeping darkness that Lyretha's visions showed him consuming everything in its path. The only way to permanently stop the corruption is to restore the proper guardianship of the springs. But such a task seems impossible given the unprecedented nature of their situation. As they explore deeper into the labyrinth's winding passages, facing traps and magical guardians that test their ability to work together as a unified team, the 3 find themselves drawn together by forces that go beyond mere practical cooperation. Each brings unique abilities essential to their progress. Lyretha's prophetic gifts guide them past magical dangers and help interpret the ancient inscriptions that hold clues to the labyrinth's deepest secrets. Ivrion's werewolf senses prove invaluable for navigating the more treacherous areas where unstable magical fields make conventional travel dangerous, while his combat skills protect them from the various animated guardians that still patrol certain sections of the complex. His unique upbringing allows him to serve as a bridge between different magical traditions, translating concepts between species with intuitive understanding born of his bicultural experience. Sturien's intimate knowledge of the labyrinth's layout and his supernatural ability to communicate with water itself make him an irreplaceable guide through the maze of passages and chambers. His ancient wisdom helps them understand the original purposes behind long-forgotten magical devices and architectural features, while his command over the water currents allows them to access areas that would otherwise remain sealed forever. But beyond these practical considerations, deeper and more complex emotions begin to bloom between the 3 of them like flowers in an unexpected garden. Lyreth finds himself drawn to both companions in ways that thrill and confuse him, his heart responding to qualities in each that complement and enhance the other. Ivrion's quiet strength and unwavering loyalty awaken feelings that transcend mere gratitude, while Sturien's mysterious past and gentle nature intrigue him beyond simple curiosity. Ivrion struggles with conflicting loyalties as his love for Lyreth grows alongside his growing fascination with Sturien's otherworldly grace and wisdom. The werewolf's natural pack instincts seem to embrace both elf and guardian, creating emotional bonds that feel more natural and right than any traditional pairing he might have imagined. Yet his awareness of his pack's demands and his sister's precarious situation create a constant undercurrent of guilt and anxiety. Sturien experiences emotions he had thought were long dead, buried beneath centuries of solitary duty and careful emotional control. The presence of these two remarkable beings awakens longings that he had suppressed so deeply he had forgotten they existed within him. The elf's brilliant courage and determination remind him of the idealistic young guardian he had once been, while the werewolf's fierce loyalty and gentle nature speak to aspects of his personality that have lain dormant for far too long. Their growing emotional connection faces its greatest test when they reach the Chamber of Mirrors, a vast circular room where all the walls are covered with reflective surfaces that show not present reality but different possible futures based on the choices they might make. Here they are forced to confront the potential consequences of every decision before them, seeing with crystal clarity what each path might lead to. Lyreth sees what fulfilling his contract with Reshazir would bring to the world. The demon would indeed cleanse the corruption from the magical networks, but the price would be the transformation of reality into something unrecognizable. The world would achieve perfect balance between chaos and order, but individual choice and free will would be eliminated in favor of absolute magical efficiency. It would be a world without suffering but also without growth, change, or the possibility of love. Ivrion witnesses the terrible fate that awaits his sister if he fails to provide the information his pact demands, but he also sees the catastrophic consequences that would result from betraying Lyreth and revealing the location of the source of ether to those who would use it for conquest rather than healing. The visions force him to confront the impossible choice between family obligation and the growing love in his heart for both his companions. Sturian beholds his own future stretching out before him, an eternity of solitude as his strength slowly fails and the springs he has protected for so long finally succumb to the corruption he can no longer hold at bay. But he also sees the possibility for redemption and renewal, a chance to restore the ancient balance and transform the labyrinth into a true sanctuary of healing once more. The Mirror Chamber's revelations force them to share their deepest secrets and most painful truths with each other. Lyreth confesses the full nature of his demonic contract and the terrible choice he will eventually have to make between honoring his agreement and protecting the world from Reshazir's influence. Ivrion admits his role as an unwilling spy and the impossible position his pack has placed him in, explaining about his sister's captivity and his own conflicted loyalties that tear at his soul daily. Sturian reveals the complete tragedy of the spring's corruption and his own role in the events that led to the current crisis. He speaks of friendships lost to ambition, of love that became destruction, and of the terrible loneliness that has been his constant companion for centuries beyond counting. The sharing of these burdens creates bonds between them that go deeper than mere attraction or partnership. The confrontation that follows their revelations nearly destroys the fragile relationships they have built. Accusations fly like arrows, trust shatters like crystal, and pain threatens to tear apart the bonds they have forged through shared danger and growing affection. Lyreth feels betrayed by Ivrion's deception, while the werewolf is tormented by guilt over his inability to protect both his sister and the elf he has come to love with desperate intensity. But ultimately, their shared goals and the strength of their growing feelings for each other prove stronger than secrets and betrayal. They recognize that they have all been trapped by circumstances beyond their control, forced into impossible positions by the expectations and demands of others. In their pain and honesty, they find the foundation for something stronger than their individual obligations. A chosen family based on understanding and mutual support rather than blood or duty. It is at this moment of crisis and potential reconciliation that Reshazir manifests in the chamber, drawn by the intense emotions and magical energies that their confrontation has generated. But the demon's appearance is different this time, his usual commanding presence tempered by something that seems almost vulnerable. The flames that usually wreath his form burn lower and cooler, and his burning eyes hold depths of uncertainty that none of them had seen before. The demon admits that watching their journey has fundamentally challenged his understanding of mortal relationships and the nature of power itself. He had entered into the contract with Lyreth expecting to deal with a typical seeker, someone whose motivations he could easily understand and manipulate to his own advantage. Instead, he has found himself drawn into a complex web of relationships and emotions that defy his ancient wisdom and experience. Reshazir confesses his own profound loneliness, revealing that his plans for claiming the source of ether stem not from mere ambition for power, but from millennia of isolation that have left him desperate for genuine connection with other conscious beings. The contract with Lyareth has given him a taste of what such connection might feel like, and he finds himself reluctant to complete a bargain that would inevitably destroy this newfound relationship that has become precious to him. The demon's vulnerability and honesty create an opening for Sturian to propose a solution so radical that it defies everything they thought they knew about the natural order. Instead of allowing any single being to claim the source of ether, why not create a new triumvirate of guardians to replace those lost centuries ago? This new group would consist not of traditional representatives from established magical traditions, but of beings from different realms entirely, demon, werewolf, and elf united in purpose, understanding, and love. The proposal requires tremendous personal sacrifice from each of them, demanding that they abandon their previous lives and identities in favor of something unprecedented and uncertain. Reshazir must give up his ancient plans for dominion over the source, accepting partnership and shared responsibility over the absolute power he has sought for so long. Ivrion must sever all ties to his werewolf pack forever, choosing the springs and his new companions over his birth family and any hope of rescuing his sister through conventional means. Lyareth must bind himself to the labyrinth permanently, accepting that he can never return to his previous life among the Blue Blade clan or fulfill the expectations his family and community have placed upon him. All three must trust in the strength of their feelings for each other and their shared commitment to protecting something greater than themselves. But the proposal also offers rewards that transcend anything they could achieve individually. Souls intertwined in patterns that go beyond the normal limitations of mortal relationships, consciousness shared across the boundaries of individual existence, and love deeper and more complete than any traditional pairing could provide. They would become something entirely new, a fusion of different magical traditions and ways of being that could serve as a bridge between the various races and realms. The decision comes not from careful logical analysis of costs and benefits, but from the undeniable strength of their feelings for each other and their shared vision of what they might accomplish together. The love that has been growing between them throughout their journey is too precious and too powerful to sacrifice for the sake of individual goals and external obligations. They choose transformation over tradition, unity over separation, and the unknown future over the familiar past. The binding ritual that transforms them into the new guardians of the springs is unlike anything that has ever been attempted in the recorded history of any magical tradition. It requires them to merge their magical essences at the deepest possible level, creating a shared consciousness that allows each to access the abilities and knowledge of the others, while somehow maintaining their individual personalities and perspectives that make them unique. The process demands a level of vulnerability and trust that none of them have ever experienced before. They must open themselves completely to each other, sharing not just their magical power but their memories, fears, dreams, and deepest secrets. The barriers between self and other dissolve gradually, replaced by a unity that is both exhilarating and terrifying in its completeness. When the transformation is complete, they find themselves fundamentally changed yet still recognizably themselves. Lyareth retains his prophetic gifts and deep understanding of elemental magic, but now these abilities are enhanced by aspects of Reshazir's mastery over fire and shadow and Ivrion's connection to the wild magic of the natural world. Ivrion keeps his werewolf strength and supernatural senses, but gains access to elven wisdom and demonic knowledge that augment his abilities beyond anything he had previously imagined possible. Reshazir maintains his ancient power and accumulated knowledge, but finds himself grounded and enriched by the mortality and emotional depth of his mortal partners. The cold isolation that had defined his existence for millennia is replaced by a warmth and connection that transforms his very nature, making him something more than he had ever been alone. The restoration of the springs follows their transformation immediately and dramatically. The corrupted waters clear as if a film has been lifted from their surface, their chaotic energies transforming into streams of pure healing power that flow throughout the continent's magical networks like blood through living veins. The corruption that has been threatening the Blue Blade clan dissolves at its source, and the entire magical ecosystem begins the process of recovery from centuries of gradual decay and imbalance. But perhaps the most remarkable change occurs in the labyrinth itself, which transforms from a place of ancient sorrow and solitary duty into a living sanctuary of love and renewal. The three guardians work together to reshape the ancient chambers into living spaces that reflect their unique relationship, creating areas where they can be together as well as spaces where each can pursue individual interests and responsibilities according to their nature and inclinations. Their love for each other continues to evolve and deepen as they settle into their new roles and responsibilities. The physical aspects of their relationship are enhanced by their magical bond, allowing them to share sensations and emotions in ways that transcend the normal limitations of separate bodies and individual consciousness. When they make love, it becomes not just a joining of flesh but a merging of souls, a celebration of the connection that has transformed them all into something greater than the sum of their individual parts. More importantly, they have created an entirely new model for how different races and magical traditions can work together in harmony and mutual respect. Their triumvirate becomes a living symbol of cooperation and unity, inspiring others throughout the continent to look beyond the traditional boundaries and prejudices that have kept different peoples separated and suspicious of each other for countless generations. Word of their unprecedented partnership spreads like ripples across still water, bringing visitors from every corner of the known world to witness what they have achieved. The labyrinth becomes a place of pilgrimage for those seeking healing, guidance, or simply hope that change and growth are possible even in the most unlikely circumstances. Their example proves that love can indeed transcend any boundary when nurtured with patience, understanding, and the courage to embrace something entirely new and unprecedented. So it was that Lyreth and Ivrion began their journey together, each carrying secrets that they could not share with the other, each bound by obligations that conflicted with their growing personal feelings. The quest for the source of ether would take them far from the familiar territories of the Blue Blade clan, into lands where ancient magic still flowed wild and untamed, where the boundaries between the realms of different species were fluid and dangerous. Their path led them through forests where the trees themselves were conscious beings, capable of communication and possessed of memories stretching back thousands of years. They crossed rivers that flowed uphill and lakes whose waters showed reflections of possible futures rather than the present moment. They encountered creatures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously and ruins of civilizations that had mastered forms of magic that were now lost to the world. The journey was arduous and dangerous, but it also provided opportunities for Lyreth and Ivrion to grow closer, to learn about each other beyond the formal roles they had been assigned. Lyreth discovered that beneath Ivrion's serious exterior was a playful intelligence and a deep capacity for compassion that had been shaped by his unique upbringing among the elves. Ivrion, in turn, was amazed by Lyreth's strength and determination, finding that his initial assumptions about Omega elves as fragile and dependent were completely incorrect. As they traveled, they began to share stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, and their fears about the quest they had undertaken. Lyreth spoke of the visions that had driven him to make his bargain with Reshazir, describing the horror of seeing his entire world consumed by chaos and corruption. Ivrion shared his memories of his father, a man who had taught him that true strength came not from dominance but from the willingness to sacrifice for those who could not protect themselves. The growing bond between them was complicated by the increasing frequency of Reshazir's manifestations. The demon appeared to Lyreth in dreams and reflections, sometimes offering guidance about their route, sometimes simply reminding the elf of his obligations under their contract. These encounters were deeply unsettling for Lyreth, not just because of the demon's terrifying appearance, but because he found himself strangely drawn to the being's intelligence and power. Reshazir was unlike any demon described in the traditional texts. Rather than being purely malevolent, he seemed to be driven by a complex set of motivations that included genuine curiosity about the mortal world and a strange form of respect for those who showed courage in the face of overwhelming odds. His conversations with Lyreth were often philosophical in nature, exploring questions about the nature of power, the meaning of sacrifice, and the value of individual choice versus collective good. It was during one of these encounters that Reshazir revealed something that changed Lyreth's understanding of their contract entirely. The demon explained that the corruption threatening the Blue Blade clan was not a natural phenomenon but the result of a previous attempt to access the source of ether. Centuries ago, another seeker had come close to finding the source, but their efforts to tap its power had created a backlash that was still echoing through the magical networks of the world. This revelation meant that Lyreth's quest was not just about fulfilling his contract with the demon, but about preventing a magical catastrophe that could destroy everything he cared about. The knowledge added urgency to their journey but also raised troubling questions about what would happen when they actually found the source and Reshazir claimed the power he had been promised. After weeks of travel through increasingly strange and magical territories, Lyreth and Ivrion finally arrived at their destination. The Labyrinth of Springs, an ancient underground sanctuary that had once served as a temple for those who had mastered the art of water magic. The entrance to the labyrinth was hidden beneath a waterfall that flowed backward, its waters rising from a pool at the base of a cliff and streaming upward into the sky before disappearing into clouds that existed in defiance of natural weather patterns. The labyrinth itself was a marvel of ancient engineering and magical artistry, with passages carved from living crystal that glowed with inner light and chambers where pools of water served as windows into other realms. The walls were covered with inscriptions in languages that predated any known civilization, telling stories of the beings who had built this place and the purposes for which it had been designed. But the labyrinth was not empty. As Lyreth and Ivrion made their way through the winding passages, following the flow of magical energy that Lyreth could sense leading toward the heart of the structure, they encountered evidence that someone else was living in these ancient halls. Fresh food in storage areas, recently tended magical workings, and the lingering scent of a presence that was neither fully human nor entirely other. Their first meeting with the labyrinth's guardian was dramatic and unexpected. They had entered a vast circular chamber where multiple streams of water flowed in impossible spirals through the air, creating a three-dimensional web of liquid light that was beautiful beyond description. At the center of this aquatic mandala stood a figure that defied easy categorization. Sturian appeared to be humanoid in basic structure, but possessed characteristics that marked him as something far more complex than any single species. He had the height and general proportions of a tall human, but his skin held an iridescent quality that shifted between pale blue and silver depending on the angle of the light. Horns curved gracefully from his temples, and his eyes glowed with a soft luminescence that seemed to contain the light of the moon reflected in still water. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made the very air vibrate with power, and the water streams around him responded to his words, shifting their patterns in ways that seemed to reflect his emotional state. He was clearly ancient beyond the lifespan of any mortal race, but there was something in his manner that suggested a deep weariness, as if he had been carrying a burden for far longer than any being should have to endure. Sturian's initial reaction to the presence of visitors in his domain was one of suspicion and hostility. He had been the guardian of this place for centuries, protecting the ancient springs from those who would seek to exploit their power for personal gain. He had seen too many seekers arrive with noble intentions only to be corrupted by the immense magical forces they encountered, transforming from heroes into threats that had to be eliminated for the greater good. The Guardian was particularly wary of Ivrion, whose werewolf scent marked him as a member of a species that Sturian had learned to distrust. Too many times, werewolf packs had sent representatives to the labyrinth seeking power that they claimed was needed to protect their territories, only to reveal later that their true goal was conquest and domination over other races. The Guardian's long experience had taught him that werewolves, despite their claims of honor and loyalty, were often driven by ambitions that made them dangerous allies. But as Sturian listened to Lyreth's explanation of their quest and observed the interactions between the elf and his werewolf companion, he began to sense that these visitors might be different from the usual seekers who found their way to his domain. There was something in the way they looked at each other, a connection that went beyond mere partnership or duty, that suggested they might be capable of the kind of selfless cooperation that the labyrinth's original builders had intended to foster. The Guardian revealed to them the true history of the springs and the tragedy that had led to their current weakened state. Long ago, the labyrinth had been maintained by a triumvirate of guardians, representatives of 3 different magical traditions who worked together to maintain the balance of forces that kept the springs flowing with pure, healing water. But one of those guardians had fallen in love with a mortal seeker, and in his desire to grant his beloved the power she sought, he had disrupted the careful equilibrium that kept the magic stable. The result had been catastrophic. The springs had been corrupted, their healing waters transformed into pools of chaotic energy that poisoned everything they touched. The unfaithful guardian had been consumed by the magical backlash, his soul trapped in the deepest levels of the labyrinth, where it continued to suffer, a warning to future generations about the dangers of placing personal desire above duty and balance. Since that time, Sturien had maintained the springs alone, using his own life force to compensate for the missing guardians and gradually purifying the corrupted waters through centuries of patient work. But the task was beyond the capabilities of any single being, no matter how powerful, and he could feel his strength slowly failing as the years passed. Without intervention, the springs would eventually fail completely, and the magical networks they supported would collapse, bringing about the same kind of corruption that was already threatening the Blue Blade clan. This revelation put Lyrath's quest in an entirely new perspective. The source of ether was not some distant legendary artifact but the heart of the spring system itself, the central nexus from which all the magical waters flowed. To give Reshazir access to the source would mean granting the demon control over the entire magical ecosystem, a prospect that filled both Lyrath and Ivrion with dread. But breaking the contract with Reshazir was not a simple matter of changing his mind. The demon had invested significant power in their agreement, and the magical bindings that held them together had become part of Lyrath's very essence. To violate the terms of their bargain would result in consequences that went far beyond mere personal punishment. It could unravel the magical protections that were keeping the corruption from spreading throughout the entire continent. As they explored the deeper levels of the labyrinth, Lyrath, Ivrion, and Sturien found themselves drawn together by circumstances that seemed almost designed to test their ability to work as a team. The ancient passages were filled with traps and guardians that could only be overcome through cooperation, requiring each of them to contribute their unique abilities and to trust in the competence and good intentions of their companions. Lyrath's prophetic gifts allowed him to foresee the activation of magical traps and to guide them around the most dangerous obstacles. His deep understanding of elemental magic made him invaluable in interpreting the ancient inscriptions and understanding the original purposes of the various chambers and devices they encountered. Ivrion's werewolf senses and physical capabilities proved essential for navigating the more treacherous areas of the labyrinth, where crumbling passages and unstable magical fields made progress dangerous for those without supernatural resilience. His combat skills protected them from the various animated guardians that still patrolled certain sections of the complex, remnants of the original security systems that had been designed to keep intruders away from the most sensitive areas. Sturien's intimate knowledge of the labyrinth's layout and his understanding of the magical principles that governed its operation made him an irreplaceable guide. His ability to communicate with the water itself allowed him to calm the more volatile magical currents and to reveal hidden passages that had been concealed for centuries. But beyond their practical cooperation, something deeper was developing between the three of them. Lyrath found himself drawn to both of his companions in ways that confused and excited him. Ivrion's quiet strength and unwavering loyalty awakened feelings in the elf that went far beyond gratitude or professional respect, while Sturien's ancient wisdom and mysterious past made him an intriguing enigma that Lyrath found himself wanting to understand more fully. Ivrion, meanwhile, was struggling with emotions that threatened to tear him apart. His growing love for Lyrath was complicated by the knowledge that he was supposed to be spying on the elf, reporting their progress to his pack and ultimately betraying the trust that was developing between them. At the same time, he found himself fascinated by Sturien, whose magical nature seemed to resonate with the wild spirit that was part of every werewolf's heritage. Sturien, for his part, was experiencing feelings that he had thought were long dead. His centuries of solitude had taught him to suppress the need for companionship and emotional connection. But the presence of these two remarkable beings was awakening longings that he had buried so deeply he had forgotten they existed. The elf's brilliant mind and courageous heart reminded him of the idealistic young guardian he had once been, while the werewolf's fierce loyalty and gentle nature spoke to aspects of his personality that had been dormant for far too long. The growing emotional connections between them were tested when they encountered the first of the major challenges that the labyrinth had been designed to present. In a chamber where all the walls were covered with mirrors that showed different possible futures, they were forced to confront the potential consequences of their various courses of action. Lyrath saw visions of what would happen if he fulfilled his contract with Reshazir. The demon would indeed cleanse the corruption from the magical networks, but the price would be the transformation of the world into something unrecognizable. a realm where chaos and order existed in perfect balance, but where individual choice and free will had been eliminated in favor of absolute magical efficiency. Ivrion saw the fate that awaited his sister if he failed to provide the information his pact demanded. She would be killed as an example to others who might consider defying the pact's will, and his own life would be forfeit as well. But he also saw what would happen if he did betray Lyreth. The elf would be captured and used as a tool to access the source of ether, ultimately resulting in the same kind of magical catastrophe they were trying to prevent. Sturian saw his own future stretched out before him. An eternity of solitude and gradual decay as his strength slowly failed, and the springs he protected were consumed by corruption. But he also saw the possibility of redemption, a future where the ancient balance could be restored and the labyrinth could once again serve its original purpose as a place of healing and renewal. The revelations from the mirror chamber forced them to confront the secrets they had been keeping from each other. Lyreth confessed the true nature of his contract with Reshazir and the terrible choice he would eventually have to make between honoring his agreement and protecting the world from the demon's influence. Ivrion admitted his role as a spy and the impossible situation his pack had placed him in, explaining about his sister's captivity and his own conflicted loyalties. The confrontation that followed was painful and intense, with accusations and hurt feelings threatening to destroy the bonds that had been growing between them. Lyreth felt betrayed by Ivrion's deception, while the werewolf was tormented by guilt over his inability to protect both his sister and the elf he had come to love. Sturian found himself caught in the middle, trying to mediate between two beings whose pain was evident but whose positions seemed irreconcilable. But the crisis also provided an opportunity for deeper understanding and forgiveness. As they talked through their respective situations, each of them began to understand the impossible pressures and conflicting loyalties that had driven the other's actions. Lyreth realized that Ivrion's deception had been motivated by desperation rather than malice, while Ivrion came to understand the full magnitude of the sacrifice that Lyreth had made in accepting the demon's contract. Sturian's perspective as someone who had lived through countless cycles of conflict and resolution allowed him to help them see beyond their immediate emotional reactions to the deeper truths of their situation. He pointed out that they all shared the same fundamental goal: protecting the people and places they loved from the corruption that threatened to destroy everything they held dear. Their methods and motivations might differ, but their ultimate objectives were aligned. The resolution of their conflict came when Reshazir himself manifested in the chamber, drawn by the intense emotions and magical energies that their confrontation had generated. The demon's appearance was as dramatic and terrifying as always, but there was something different about his demeanor this time. Instead of the commanding presence he usually projected, there was something almost vulnerable in his manner, as if he too was struggling with conflicting desires and obligations. The demon revealed that he had been watching their progress through the labyrinth with growing fascination and concern. He had entered into the contract with Lyreth expecting to deal with a typical mortal seeker, someone whose motivations he could easily understand and manipulate. Instead, he had found himself drawn into a complex web of relationships and emotions that challenged his understanding of what mortals were capable of achieving. Reshazir admitted that his original plan to claim the source of ether had been motivated by loneliness as much as by ambition. For millennia, he had existed in isolation, his demonic nature making it impossible for him to form the kinds of connections that mortals took for granted. The contract with Lyreth had given him a taste of what it might be like to have a genuine relationship with another being, and he found himself reluctant to complete the bargain that would inevitably destroy that connection. The demon's confession opened up possibilities that none of them had previously considered. If Reshazir was willing to renegotiate the terms of his contract with Lyreth, perhaps they could find a solution that would benefit everyone involved. The source of ether was powerful enough to cleanse the corruption, restore the springs, and even provide Reshazir with the connection he craved, but only if they could find a way to share its power rather than allowing any single being to claim it entirely. Sturian proposed a solution that was as radical as it was dangerous: the creation of a new triumvirate of guardians to replace the ones who had been lost centuries ago. Instead of traditional representatives of different magical traditions, this new group would consist of beings from different realms entirely: a demon of fire and shadow, a werewolf of earth and spirit, and an elf of water and air. The proposal required each of them to make sacrifices that would fundamentally change their nature. Reshazir would have to give up his plans for dominion over the source of ether, accepting instead a role as one of 3 co-equal guardians. Ivrian would have to sever his connection to his werewolf pack permanently, choosing loyalty to the springs over loyalty to his birth family. Lyareth would have to accept a binding to the labyrinth that would make it impossible for him to ever return to his previous life among the Blue Blade clan. But the proposal also offered rewards that went beyond mere magical power. The 3 of them would be bound together in a way that transcended the usual limitations of mortal relationships, their souls intertwined in a pattern that would allow them to share not just power but consciousness itself. They would become something new, a fusion of different magical traditions and different ways of being that could serve as a bridge between the various races and realms. The decision to accept Sturian's proposal was not made lightly. Each of them spent time alone, contemplating what they would be giving up and what they might gain. Lyareth meditated on his visions of the future, trying to understand how this path compared to the alternatives he had foreseen. Ivrian thought about his sister and his pack, knowing that choosing the springs would mean abandoning any hope of rescuing her through conventional means. Reshazir examined his own motivations, trying to determine whether his desire for connection was worth abandoning his plans for ultimate power. In the end, it was the strength of their feelings for each other that made the decision for them. The love that had been growing between them was too powerful and too precious to sacrifice for the sake of their individual goals and obligations. They had found something rare and beautiful in their connection, and they were willing to reshape their entire existence to preserve and nurture it. The ritual that bound them together as the new guardians of the springs was unlike anything that had ever been attempted before. It required them to merge their magical essences at the deepest level, creating a shared consciousness that allowed each of them to access the abilities and knowledge of the others, while maintaining their individual personalities and perspectives. The process was intense and transformative, involving levels of vulnerability and trust that none of them had ever experienced before. They had to open themselves completely to each other, sharing not just their magical power but their memories, their fears, their dreams, and their deepest secrets. The barriers between self and other dissolved, replaced by a unity that was both exhilarating and terrifying. When the ritual was complete, they found themselves fundamentally changed but still recognizably themselves. Lyareth retained his prophetic abilities and his deep understanding of elemental magic, but he now also possessed aspects of Reshazir's mastery over fire and shadow and Ivrian's connection to the wild magic of the natural world. Ivrian kept his werewolf strength and senses, but gained access to elven wisdom and demonic power that enhanced his abilities beyond anything he had previously imagined. Reshazir maintained his supernatural longevity and magical knowledge, but found himself grounded by the mortality and emotional depth of his mortal partners. The restoration of the springs that followed their transformation was immediate and dramatic. The corrupted waters cleared, their chaotic energies transformed into streams of pure healing power that flowed throughout the magical networks of the continent. The corruption that had been threatening the Blue Blade clan was cleansed at its source, and the magical ecosystem began to recover from centuries of gradual decay. But the most remarkable change was in the labyrinth itself. Where it had once been a place of solitude and sorrow, it became a sanctuary of love and renewal. The 3 guardians worked together to transform the ancient chambers into a living space that reflected their unique relationship, creating areas where they could be together and spaces where each could pursue individual interests and responsibilities. Their love for each other continued to grow and evolve as they settled into their new roles. The physical aspects of their relationship were enhanced by their magical bond, allowing them to share sensations and emotions in ways that transcended the normal limitations of separate bodies. When they made love, it was not just a joining of flesh but a merging of souls, a celebration of the connection that had transformed them all. But perhaps more importantly, they had created a new model for how different races and magical traditions could work together. Their triumvirate became a symbol of cooperation and mutual respect, inspiring others throughout the continent to look beyond the traditional boundaries that had kept the various peoples separated and suspicious of each other. Visitors began to come to the labyrinth seeking healing, guidance, or simply the chance to witness the unprecedented partnership that the 3 guardians had created. Elves who had been taught to fear demons found themselves conversing with Reshazir about philosophy and magical theory. Werewolves who had been raised to view other races as inferior discovered in Lyreth a strength and wisdom that challenged their preconceptions. Members of all races found in the restored springs a source of healing that went beyond the merely physical, addressing spiritual and emotional wounds that they had carried for years. The legend of the three guardians spread throughout the known world, inspiring songs and stories that celebrated their love and their sacrifice. But for Lyreth, Ivrion, and Reshazir, the most important reward was the simple joy of waking up each day knowing that they had found their place in the world and their perfect companions for the journey through eternity. Years passed, and their bond only grew stronger. They learned to balance their individual responsibilities with their shared duties, each contributing their unique gifts to the maintenance of the springs and the guidance of those who sought their help. They faced challenges and conflicts, as all relationships do, but their deep connection and commitment to each other allowed them to work through any difficulties that arose. The labyrinth became a place of pilgrimage for lovers of all kinds, especially those whose relationships challenged traditional boundaries and expectations. Same-sex couples, interracial partnerships, and other unions that were looked upon with suspicion in the outside world found acceptance and blessing in the sanctuary that the three guardians had created. As decades turned to centuries, the story of their love became woven into the very fabric of the magical world. Children grew up hearing tales of the demon, the werewolf, and the elf who had chosen love over power, cooperation over dominance, and unity over separation. Their example inspired countless others to look beyond the surface differences that seemed to divide them and to seek the deeper connections that could bind all thinking beings together. The corruption that had once threatened to destroy the magical ecosystem became nothing more than a distant memory, held in check by the perfect balance that the three guardians maintained through their unique partnership. The springs flowed clear and pure, their waters carrying healing and renewal to every corner of the continent and beyond. And in the heart of the labyrinth, in chambers filled with the sound of flowing water and the soft glow of magical light, three souls who had found their perfect match in each other continued to love, to grow, and to create wonders that would endure long after the mountains themselves had crumbled to dust. Their story became a testament to the transformative power of love, proof that even the most unlikely partnerships could flourish when nurtured with patience, understanding, and the courage to embrace something entirely new. In a world often divided by fear and prejudice, they had created a sanctuary where difference was celebrated rather than feared, where love was stronger than obligation, and where the bonds between hearts could literally reshape reality itself. The labyrinth of springs had become more than just a place of magical power. It had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that love could conquer any obstacle, and that the most beautiful futures were often built on the foundation of choices that seemed impossible at the time they were made. And so the tale of Lyreth, Ivrion, and Reshazir continues to inspire all who hear it, an eternal reminder that love is the most powerful magic of all, capable of transforming not just individual lives but entire worlds when embraced with courage, wisdom, and an open heart willing to see beyond the boundaries that others would use to keep souls apart.